This is Sitrep, the podcast on Philippine affairs and Filipino interests. We are here at the dialogue on Asean Maritime Security here at Pasay City. And with us, we're proud to have as our first guest is the one, the only, the great Professor Richard Heydarian. Absolutely. The greatest, absolutely greatest, the senior lecturer at the UP Asian Center. Sir, welcome to Sitrep, sir.
Salamat po, finally.
Sir, Professor Heydarian. So perhaps
Just call me Richard, please.
so Richard, before we go into this into the ASEAN forum, naturally we want to get your reactions to the political situation. We, as you may have seen, President Marcos asked his entire cabinet to submit their voluntary resignation letters, courtesy resignation letters, in reaction specifically to the midterms. He said that, quote, that there's no room for excuses, that the Filipino people have chosen, and that this isn't business as usual. Your initial reactions, and who do you think will get the sack, basically?
Well, I mean, first of all, I would say there's this line in Tolstoy's War and Peace where one of the characters says, we lost because early on we told ourselves we're going to lose, right? I think this is the Battle of Austerlitz or something like that when, the three emperors lost to Napoleon. My sense is, to be honest, the messaging we're getting from President Marcos Jr. since the podcast interview the other day, and now these big statements about cabinet reshuffle, I don't think it signals strength. I think it signals, in many ways, preemptive. I would say, not defeat, but a kind of a preemptive recalibration, or if not succumbing to Duterte momentum, or pro Duterte momentum, which I felt was, to put it mildly and nicely, was an overcorrection. I think it would have been best for the president to just say, "Well, we underperformed, and we congratulate others. This just shows the dynamism of our democracy, that we're a competitive democracy. That people have sent a signal that they want more effectiveness and diversity." So, to be honest, I felt the president was overcorrecting, and just when I thought that was already bad enough, here we are with this. What looks to me like more of a performative, symbolic kind of gesture, because the very first cabinet members who said they're more than happy to tender their symbolic resignations are the very cabinet members I believe will stick around. I mean, I don't mean to mention who's the DOTR secretary, for instance, right? So I see a lot of performativity. I see a lot of signaling that I don't think necessarily helps the case of the president, because the basically the argument of the other side, whether it's the pink side or more importantly the Duterte side, is Marcos is now a lame duck. So I think all of this positioning shows a sense of panic, or at least seems to show a sense of panic, if not a sense of weakness, and kind of preemptive succumbing to the seeming momentum for a Duterte return to the Malacanang.
Going to the actual conference, Professor, how important, Richard, sorry, how important are these forums in building the relationships that we're expecting from the Philippines and ASEAN states? And what do you expect to hear from our ASEAN partners here? And lastly, have you heard it so far?
Well, I mean, first of all, I would say that one of the unfortunate things about being a Filipino strategist nowadays is that we spend more time with our Western counterparts than our fellow ASEAN counterparts. I've probably met more European and Western, Japanese senior diplomats in the past 2 3 months alone. I was in Brussels the other month. I was in just Paris the other day. I was in London the other day. Lots of conversation with our friends in Europe. Lots of conversation. When Prime Minister Ishiba was here in town, I met members of his cabinet. So I love it. I have no problem with that. Having great relationship with our Western allies who share values, who are very helpful to us. But at the end of the day, we are in this neighborhood. We're not in Europe. We're not. We're not in Northeast Asia. We are in Southeast Asia, and we are in ASEAN. So I think this kind of fora are extremely important for us to have a sense of what are the 50 shades of balancing act that different ASEAN countries are doing. It also gives you a kind of a sobering reminder that most of our neighbors don't feel comfortable standing up to China, and may not even be comfortable with welcoming the United States to this part of the world to stand up to China. So I think it is sobering in that sense, but it may be also enlightening enough for us to be able to properly position and calibrate our message heading into next year, because next year we're going to be the ASEAN chair. As ASEAN chair, we have tremendous amount of prerogative on shaping what will be the agenda. We can even issue chairman's statement if there's no consensus on some contentious issues, i.e., West Philippine Sea. But as much as possible, you want to find that kind of where is the Venn diagram overlap, right? And I think that's what we can do. From my own panel a while ago, having Malaysians, Vietnamese, and obviously Filipinos and Indonesians there, I think there's just enough for us to work something out of this, because this is just an opening for more acts to come. This is an opening act. I think there's going to be another Manila dialogue later this year. There's going to be ASEAN and related dialogues next year. I hope we'll have something similar. I mean, we'll make this similar to the Shangri-La dialogue as one of the premier dialogues in the region. So I think this is a very good first step in that right direction. And I think it's also a very good, opportunity for us to make them understand where we're coming from, right? We're not puppets of America. We're not deputy sheriff of the United States. I hear all of this, implications, sometimes insinuations, sometimes worse, by some of our ASEAN partners being, irritated by us because we do the right thing and they don't, and we make them look bad. But it is what it is. We have to work it that way, and we have to find that forum for dialogue. So I'm happy, and I think the statements and sentiments that are coming out are encouraging enough for us to build on. I don't think it's a question of Philippines versus the rest of ASEAN. That's not what I see here. It's more of like getting closer to kind of a common ground that at the end of the day doesn't basically legitimize China's version of reality.
Richard, your panel earlier was naturally on the rules-based international order, and naturally, in these uncertain geopolitical times, people are asking, what is the international rules-based order? And we had sentiments earlier saying, is it who sets it? Is it a Western thing? Is it a Chinese thing? So
Yeah.
perhaps your quick reactions to those sorts of sentiments going around, especially now where a lot of it seems to be wishful thinking in this part of the world.
Well, I mean, your alternative is very clear: rule of jungle. And if you're Philippines and you're not a superpower, you don't want that. It's just as simple as that. So let's work with what we got, right? And that's really where the challenge is. But I think that's also where the hope is. As far as rules-based international order is concerned, I said, it reminds me of the Holy Roman Empire, which was neither Roman because it was Austrian and it was really not holy. I mean, we can talk about the family lives of their decadent emperors, and we can also talk about the fact that it was not much of an empire. It was really a mumbo jumbo constellation of smaller principalities in the Germanic world and Central Europe. So you can say the same thing. What international rules-based order? Whose rules, right? you know, there's conflict in Ukraine, these countries react. There's countries in Gaza, these countries react. And I don't see any overlap between them. The Malaysians attack the Germans and Europeans for being hypocritical on Gaza, but at the same time, the same Malaysians go there and embrace Putin as if he's not doing horrible things to civilians in Ukraine. Hypocrisy runs in both ways. So it's double standard. Now, does that mean we should just give up? No, because if we give up, it's a rule of jungle, and you don't want to live in the 19th century, right? You don't want to live in the 19th century. So the 20th century project maybe is falling apart. The post-World War II, US-led hegemony, international liberal order is falling apart. Yeah, but I think in its place, we can have a multipolar order, which is not the Chinese version of multipolar order. Because the Chinese and the Russian multipolar order is basically each gangster controls each neighborhood, right? So I'm Russia, I'm going to get Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and parts of Middle East. I'm China, I get East Asia. Americans, you can keep, Panama and Greenland to yourself. We don't want that world. That's a kind of a mafia world, right? It's kind of like Al Pacino cutting a deal with seven other mafia. We don't want that. So I think it's important for us in the Philippines to leverage our alliance with the United States, but at the same time, right, make sure that we're creating more and more room for maneuver. Because you and I may not agree on what Trump 2.0 means, but I think we can all agree that America is becoming even more insular and more thinking about itself, and they have every right to do so. I mean, American manufacturing is dismal compared to what it could have been had they invested in their industrial capacity and all. And the Chinese are, to be honest, impressively scary. Right? Like they're moving on every front. As Germans, if you don't want to believe it, when Germans in Munich tell me they're worried about Chinese cars, which I took as a joke 3 years ago and now no longer, if Elon Musk is panicking about BYD, then I think we have to take that seriously. So, in short, the Philippines, we're a U.S. treaty ally. We believe in a rules-based international order. We believe in an UNCLOS-based order, but we have to accept the imperfection of the system, and we have to balance our alliances and networks of alliances to make sure we move at least towards a certain version of an international order, which is less jungle and more rules. So in short, it's 50 shades, and in that 50 shades, you want it to be more less dark and much closer to a world that protects, or at least somehow protects, the interests of smaller countries.
And last question, Richard. You talk about 50 Shades here in ASEAN, and a lot of rhetoric goes around in these conferences about ASEAN centrality. To be honest with you, listeners, sir, is ASEAN centrality a actual thing outside conference and lecture halls? Because this is a sentiment I've heard also from certain individuals. And how can we build ASEAN centrality when there's conflicting interests in the region? Perhaps you can give us, like practical. They talk about practical consensus building, practical trust building. Give us an example of how that may be to close us off.
Well, anyone who says ASEAN is, they don't know what they're talking about, because ASEAN is a half a century old institution. So I can talk about ASEAN's reaction to Vietnamese invasion of Cambodia. That was a very different ASEAN. I can talk about ASEAN's response to referendum for independence in Indonesia. That's a very different ASEAN. And then I can talk about ASEAN of Duterte era from ASEAN of now, right? So ASEAN is not this. It's not monolithic. Over times, it changes. Even with the European Union, despite all of its institutionalization and all, it has ebbs and flows. It's the same thing with ASEAN. We're not in the worst place in the world as far as ASEAN is concerned, but we're also nowhere close to where we can be, considering ASEAN now is basically a constellation of multiple middle powers, if not a potential superpower in Indonesia. Right? Indonesia could be the fourth, third largest economy. Philippines and Vietnam, top 10 biggest economies. You have Thailand there, you have Singapore there. So you just look at the couple of big countries. These are not small. I mean, I'm sick and tired of hearing ASEAN is small countries. It is not. I mean, in what universe is Mexico a small country? And Mexico has the same population as the Philippines. Indonesia has twice more population than Mexico, right? So we're not small countries. China makes us a bit smaller than we should look. But so what I'm saying here is that ASEAN can do so much more if you're willing to invest in it, and if you're willing to deal with the clown politics that is taking over in different parts of this country. But what gives me hope is people like you guys. What gives me hope is all of these young strategists I see here, and the not so young strategists who are beginning to speak in a language that I feel is commensurate to us. So, when I deal with, maybe not Americans, but when I deal with Europeans or Japanese or whatever, I feel that sense of symmetry, of mutual respect, that I think is more genuine than ever, because we have now the economic size. Now they're desperate to sell us their submarines, and now we have billions of dollars to put in our military. We're no longer just a bunch of banana republic post-colonial countries, right? We're no longer fourth world countries, right? We're major emerging powers and markets. So I set my personal position is middle power diplomacy. Work with India, which is going to be the next superpower. Work with Europe, work with Japan and Korea, work with Brazil, Turkey. There's so many other countries out there who are not 100% with us, but they are with us on many other issues. And at the very least, they are with us with this idea that, hey, we don't want a world which is either Trump's whims or worse, China's version of, peace and order and harmony, right? And I don't want to even talk about Russia, right? So that's my point. There are certain structural realities you have to deal with, but I think there's also some tectonic shifts that, if we can properly position ourselves, will advantage us in 10 to 20 years from now. So what we do now will shape what's going to happen in the next 10 to 20 years, because we finally have strategic agency. And I always tell to the Philippines, we have to strengthen our sense of self. We have to stop calling ourselves a small power. We have this obsession about David versus Goliath, but people forget David was like a ripped, like macho alpha male guy. He would put Andrew Tate to shame, right? He was not like some Kawawa guy versus Goliath. He was ripped. He knew his stuff. So if you want to play the David versus Goliath, you have to be a robust middle power, mid-sized. I mean, David was not small. He was a mid-sized guy who had all the ripped muscles and all, and knew how to throw his arrow, whatever, slingshot or whatever. That's the idea of David we want to be, right? Not this idea of underdog, right? So I think once we embrace that reality, in spite of our crazy politics, in spite of then we're there. Because at least one thing that is unique with us is that we're not the only country with messed up politics. I was just in Hungary, I was just in post-Brexit, UK, France. I don't want to even talk about what's going to happen in France. Every country has domestic problems. Indonesia, Malaysia, we can go. But at least here in the Philippines is, I think, even if Duterte's come back, well, not the father, he's gone, but he's basically there for the rest of his life. But even if Sara becomes an ex-president, or even Bongo for that matter, I don't think they can push the Philippines in a pro-China direction. Because to end it, this kind of fora are part of institutionalization. of a consensus on what a self-respecting, patriotic Filipino should like. So what we're doing here is making sure that whoever is our next president, they will really think twice before saying something foolish on let's just fold over and let the Chinese take over, right? Or at the same time, smart enough to realize U.S. is important, but it's not end all be all of our foreign policy. So that's why this conference is very important.
On that optimistic note, Professor Richard Heydarian of the UP Asian Center, thank you so much
Thank
for
you so
being
much.
in
Maraming
Sitrep.
salamat.
God bless.
Pleasure.
Bless.